can farmers successfully navigate today's tumultuous political and environmental landscape? Join me for today's episode as we discuss this and more with Ashley Randle, Commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. If you're the woman who does it all, farm work, housework, bookwork, homework, getting up at the break of dawn, this is the podcast for you.
How do you multiply by fractions now?
Get away from the cares of the day. Free stock, root stock, feed stock, seed stock. Chat with women around the world who raise food, flowers, and fun. With your host, Kay Castrataro. That's me. Welcome back to Food, Flowers, and Fun. I am your host, Kay Castrataro, and as always, we are sponsored by Penlight for Farmers, helping you to create purposeful farm lives full of time, energy, and abundance. And today, I am just so excited to have with us Ashley Randle. She is the Commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Ag Resources, I believe, correct? Is that
That's correct.
how it's named? She is a fifth generation dairy farm kids. So we're gonna just have lots of fun today talking farming, politics, mental health, the whole gamut. So Ashley, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, it is a delight to have someone of your status on the show. So why don't you just start off by telling a little bit about yourself, your history with this crazy farm life that we have, and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So I grew up on a fifth generation dairy farm in Western Massachusetts in South Deerfield. And I grew up working alongside my grandparents and my parents on the farm. I fell in love with showing Guernsey cattle. And so those are the fawn and white cattle that you might see. They're known for their rich beta carotene in their milk and the golden Guernsey milk. But I fell in love with the Guernseys, and that's what my mom grew up showing. And so I became actively involved in 4-H. And I will say that 4-H was one of the most critical in terms of my personal development and being involved in the 4-H program in terms of making connections, really figuring out what I wanted to do from a career perspective. And when I was 12 years old, I first heard the term of an agricultural lawyer. And I thought that sounded really fun because I'm an only child and I like to argue and I also love agriculture. So I
and as an only child, you missed out on all those natural opportunities that those of us who have multiple siblings get. Oh my goodness. Did you get to argue with your parents? Did you try that whole negotiating with them? Did that work?
Oh, all the time. I was always negotiating for something. So I love that opportunity. Yeah. So yes. So ag law was something that I thought would be great to be able to give back to farmers, to be able to support farmers, work with the industry. So I went to Cornell for undergrad and I double majored in business and animal science. And then immediately after graduation, I came back to Massachusetts so I could be closer to the farm. And I went to Western New England University School of Law. And so that allowed me to be at the farm still, but also go to law school. And out of law school, I had the opportunity to work for the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. Mm-hmm. And that was what really launched my career in public service. And I fell in love with public service. I believe deeply in public service and the good that it can do, and especially for the farming community. So to be able to work with farmers, understand what the challenges are while still having a legal framework in mind has been tremendously helpful. And I was able to come back to Massachusetts in 2018, and I was our legislative and policy director at the department until I was appointed commissioner in 2023.
Okay, so that's, my goodness, there's so much right there to unpack. So I'm really curious as to what it looks like for you interacting with farmers with your legal background and now as commissioner, being involved in so much of the policy. I wouldn't No, I'm going out on a limb here because I'm not familiar with the way that the Mass Department does it, but I know that the Rhode Island Division of Ag is not necessarily involved in policy making, but definitely in policy implementation and in an ideal world in influencing the policy before it gets, as a resource before it gets implemented. So I'm curious for you how you feel your role as commissioner is different because of both your legal and your ag background.
So I would say coming from an ag background and a dairy background, understanding the challenges of environmental considerations, as well as market challenges, labor, certainly workforce is one of the biggest challenges that the industry is facing, as well as looking at the dynamic we currently have at the federal level and how you navigate policies changing so quickly and so often. And so I think having the legal background has really helped me in my role because I'm putting myself in the farmer's shoes and thinking, what would I be doing if I was faced with this challenge? Whether it was a funding cut or a change in policy, how can we respond and be both nimble in responding, but making sure that it's effective?
Hmm.
And so when I was working on our legislative and policy affairs at the department, you're correct in that we're not lobbying or advocating for certain policies, but we are implementing them. But we have established a really good relationship with our legislators across the state. And I would say that it's become a partnership, which is what makes us more effective because we're constantly talking with legislators. They are very supportive across the state of our agricultural community and they want to understand ways to be able to support the industry so that farming is a viable career opportunity. And so we have those conversations on a weekly basis. And through those conversations, we're able to share what the impacts are we're hearing from farms, what their concerns are, and then ultimately hope that policy changes are put in place that we can then help to implement at the department.
Yeah, so I'm loving so much of this. So I think, you were talking about how quickly things are happening on a federal level and, just the last 24, 48 hours have shown us that we are in a constant state of flux here in our current American life. And so for a lot of people, that creates an added sense of powerlessness, which I think a lot of farmers have felt that for a long time. I mean, we know about the dairy buyouts in the 80s and it's just been generation after generation of farmers feeling, I think, powerless to affect change meaningfully for their farms. Like they can work at a farm level, but then there's this whole legislative and policy world that happens kind of without them understanding it or being feeling like they can influence it. And I don't think that that's actually the case. I think we actually have a lot of power to influence that. But could you speak to the way that farmers can get involved without becoming full-time lobbyists? Because let's face it, like every farmer is busy. Every farmer is struggling with their stuff. And yet, I think that farmers' voices are super important, which is why we do this podcast. So, can you speak to that a little bit, like on your end? How can farmers get involved and actually make meaningful impacts?
100% agree. I do think that farmers' voices are very powerful, but as you mentioned, time is the most precious commodity they have. And sometimes that doesn't always rise to the top in terms of advocacy and talking to legislators or reaching out because they have so much to worry about on the farm.
Mhm.
But what we've really found, and I like to say we have an agricultural community here. And I truly believe that it is a community and a network within our local food system. And we're very fortunate to have not only commodity associations, so we have the Association of Dairy Farmers, the Cape Cod Cranberry Growers Association, but we also have buy local organizations.
Mhm.
And we have 10 of those across the state who are working to really promote farms and to make the connection to consumers. But they're also supporting farms with climate change and any ways that they can be supportive there, mental health, and resources for the farming community. So I would say between the commodity associations and our buy locals, they really are working with the farms to be able to help amplify their concerns and their message.
Mhm.
So they host convenings next week, actually next Wednesday, we have Ag Day at the State House, which is my favorite day of the year. And it's an opportunity where hundreds of farmers come in, 4-H, FFA, and they set up meetings with legislators to talk about the most timely concerns that they have, as well as potential funding requests, because we're currently in the midst of budget season. So
Yeah.
it's really a great opportunity, and it's something that Farm Bureau also helps to coordinate. So we have Farm Bureau who's working to advocate on behalf of the farmers and be the farmers' voice on issues. And it's a day that really represents the community aspect and where everyone is on the same page trying to work towards a common goal.
Right. Oh, so I think that's really cool. So your Ag Day at the State House, they actually set up a lot of legislative meetings with the farmers. Is that what I'm hearing? Because
Yes.
back in my former life as an ag extension agent, I used to go to Ag Day at the State House in Rhode Island all of the time, and we always had farmer displays, and there were food samples and all kinds of informational stuff. So we kind of engaged with the legislators that way when they were just kind of moving through the building doing their day to day. And maybe there were some of those more targeted meetings, but that was never really suggested to us as like a huge goal of that. And so I think that's huge to take advantage of that. And I would really recommend to farmers that they find at least like their state representative, or like the representative from their small district, and get to know them and put your concerns forward. Look at the different committees, like the finance committee or the environmental committee, and just kind of get one or two people that you can kind of get on speed dial. Like I feel like it is really hard to feel like you can be an activist, but if you build a relationship with some of these people from the get-go, like as soon as they're in office, you actually can start to communicate with them on more of a one-to-one basis. What do you find to be the most effective form of advocacy that farmers themselves can take without outsourcing it? Because I totally love what Farm Bureau does, and I think it's very important. And I also know that when you get a whole bunch of farmers that actually show up to the state house or who actually call a representative, that's an even bigger impact because that organization, I think there's a feeling by the legislators like, well, they're paid to be here. Like this is their job. They're supposed to be here. And it doesn't carry the same weight as it does when an actual farmer walks in the door, taking time out of their lives.
Mhm.
So can you speak to that a little bit? Like how can farmers act judiciously, but the most effectively, do you think?
One of the things that we've really seen, actually, two things I'll mention. So, because our farming community sets up legislative tours and invites legislators out to their farms, we've really seen a lot of positive change come from the legislators seeing firsthand what the dairy farm operation looks like, or vegetable farm, or apple orchard, and to really understand the impacts of either grant funding or new policies that were maybe well intended but had negative consequences in action. And from there, we've seen changes made because the legislators were able to see firsthand those impacts. I will also say that because farmers show up for Ag Day at the State House and they participate in meetings with legislators as well as table and talk to attendees, it really has highlighted the importance of agriculture to our economy. And 2 sessions ago, we used to have a joint committee on environment, natural resources, and agriculture.
Hmm.
So everything was combined, and sometimes agriculture was a forgotten topic in those conversations.
Yeah.
But because of the advocacy and farmers showing up, it really rose to the top. And so 2 sessions ago, they had a joint committee on agriculture and fisheries formed. And now any legislation that's pertaining to aquaculture, seafood, the agricultural sector goes through this committee and gets more attention. So I really do think farmers showing up, making the invitation to legislators to come to their farms, to come to a meeting, really does carry a lot of weight and value.
Oh, that's so encouraging to hear. I think it's really beautiful. I love having agriculture and fisheries put together, by the way. I mean, that's we have aquaculturalists on the show as often as I can get them to come because I do believe that they are a part of agriculture. Like I think expanding that understanding is hugely important. But I love the fact that you're talking about 2 days a year. Like what you just described, Act Day at the State House is 1 day a year. Like it's not something where you have to do this every month, every week. It's 1 day a year. And then having a legislative tour on your farm, 1 day a year. So we're talking about if you were to get involved as a farmer, if you were to say, where is my impact going to be the most important? If you were to reach out and invite your legislators 1 day a year or partner with Farm Bureau and say, hey, Farm Bureau, can you organize this for us? And I'll be a host farm. Then they do the work, they get you out there, and you have 1 day that you open up your farm, you talk about the things that are working and not working for you. 1 day you take off and you go to Ag Day at the State House and you say, this is so important, I'm going to take 1 day. You've taken 2 days out of the year and you've probably done the most important things you can do because, as I say about non-farmers all the time, it's not that they are stupid, it's that they're truly ignorant. Like they do not know because they haven't been exposed to farming. We are increasingly creating this whole generation of people who are 2, 3 generations removed from the farm. Some of them don't have grandparents who are farmers. Some of them don't have great grandparents who are farmers. So that whole connection to agriculture that we all had, even 2 generations ago, it
Mhm.
isn't there in the same way. And so for us to bring them on the farm and really communicate what it is that we're experiencing, I think that's so powerful. And as someone who definitely is feeling a little overwhelmed sometimes by, what's going on in the world and wanting to make a difference, to think that 2 days can actually be super, super influential. That takes a lot of the pressure off, but it also makes those 2 days something that I'd be more willing to invest in, I think.
Mhm.
So I really, really love that. So earlier, you also talked about your mental health and wellness because there's a mass-grown wellness program that I believe you instituted. Am I correct?
Yes, that's
All
correct.
right, let's talk about that because mental health is one of my big things. So we want to keep farmers mentally healthy so they can stay in the business and not burn out or sell out. So
Yes, completely agree. And I will say this was probably one of my favorite projects I've been able to work on during my career.
oh,
I had truthfully never written a grant application before, but we saw this opportunity at the department for the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network to
yes.
be able to set up a mental health program at our department.
Mm.
And this was back in 2022. We had started the application, and it was a $530,000 grant. And we were successful in receiving the full amount. And really, what we wanted to focus on was resources that were tailored to the farming community based on Massachusetts farmers and what their needs were. So we did quite a bit of survey and outreach work to understand the main concerns that farmers were facing. And also, one of the other models we had learned about in Vermont, because they had been doing this work for a very long
Yeah, they're
time.
very cutting edge on a lot of this stuff.
Yes. And in with the dairy sector and in response to the dairy crisis years ago, they had started their mental health program called Farm First.
Mm.
And so we worked with them to set up a peer support network. So farmer led, so farmers would feel comfortable talking to other farmers.
Yeah.
And the peer support network currently has 7 individuals within it from across the state who really are looked upon as a support network for the community. And farmers reach out to them. We hear the testimonials, and it's really full circle to see farmers both willing to be vulnerable and access resources, but also the impacts of when they do.
Yeah.
And when I was writing our grant application, a farmer had actually reached out to me who was experiencing mental health challenges and asked what resources there were. And I said, we currently don't have any resources. We can outsource and you could go to a regular doctor, but they probably don't understand what you're experiencing as a farmer.
Yeah.
And so, as a continuation of the program, we've been able to grow not only the peer support network, but to also have a mental health and wellness coordinator on our staff who can
Wow.
talk one on one with farmers and provide support to them when they reach out. And I think that's been really key. And as I said, farmers have unique challenges that your everyday primary care provider might not be able to respond to and understand. And so to connect with another farmer or someone who's understanding what you're going through
Yeah.
has really been one of the most rewarding aspects of the program.
Yeah. So I'd like to ask you a little bit about the uptake for that. Like how it sounds like farmers are making use of that program, and I'm curious as to how like numbers, like what percentage of farmers do you think reach out, or it's kind of a hard question to answer, but not too long ago we had somebody from the Rhode Island Ag Mediation Program in here, and they had talked about how Land and Sea Together had set up a farmer helpline for a lot of that same thing, and that the use of that helpline was not nearly what they had expected or hoped for. So I don't think it necessarily represents that there isn't a need. I think it more represents that the helpline was not is not perceived as the go-to resource. And so I'm curious as to how or what you think has been successful in getting farmers to connect with your program.
So, certainly word of mouth within the farming community through the peer support network. I will say that some of our peer support network members work for extension. So they're extension educators and they're deeply woven within their community and they have relationships with many of the farmers in their county or immediate farming community.
Yeah.
Others are, as I said, farmers themselves, but also on several boards or very connected to the community. So we're often hearing from them without describing the specifics of the cases
Of
that
course.
they're dealing with. They will reach out and let us know that I talked to a fellow farmer. I provided them these resources and they are in a better place now. I checked in with them again. And so there is that continuation of services and follow up. And sometimes, I think last year, one of our peer support network members had maybe 10 interactions with different farmers
Okay.
within their community because they are so trusted as a community member. And then others maybe had one or two.
Okay.
But it's helpful to hear from them the types of challenges that farmers are coming to them for
Yeah.
so that then we can adapt our training resources and provide additional training for them so that they feel well equipped to be able to support farmers.
So that was a couple of the things, because I've worked on, um, again, in a former life. I have many former lives. It's amazing what you can do in 49 years, but I worked a lot in the humanitarian sector, and so some
Mhm.
of what I did was creating guidance on mental health and psychosocial support. And so, one of my big passions is not only that we provide mental health and psychosocial support to farmers, for example. So, like the peer network that you're talking about is so powerful, but also that we support those peers not to experienced secondary trauma themselves because as anybody out there will know, if you're talking to somebody who's in a constant crisis or is having, a lot of difficulty, you can end up taking that on yourself and then ending up in a bad place yourself. So, how do you go about training your peers? What kind of follow-up training, initial training, their own support? What do they get? I'm just interested in the whole process.
So, working with Vermont Farm First, we were able to do a three-part training series. And certainly, Vermont farmers and Massachusetts farmers are facing many of the similar challenges.
Sure.
So, they were able to take their learnings from Vermont, bring them to Massachusetts, and through the three-part series, it was basically going through the steps of identifying when someone may be in crisis or maybe needing support and following that process through with resources that we developed together. So on our website, we have a whole suite of resources depending on the type of mental health and wellness challenge that a farmer is facing. And the peer support network is then equipped with those resources, and we continue to adapt those
Yeah.
on a yearly basis
Oh, good.
based on what we're hearing from the peer support network.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, we're actually looking this month to host another training because some of the peer support network members have come to us and said, well, there's a new challenge we're hearing from farmers, and we don't really know how to support them in
Mm,
this area. Could there be a tailored training to make us better equipped for this topic?
yeah.
So we've been working with Vermont Farm First to do another training later this month and be able to respond to what those questions are from the peer support network. But I do
Great.
think, as you said, the continuation of training and support is critical because from the stories that we hear from our peer support network members, it is easy to internalize and to take on, as you said, what the challenges are that the fellow farmer is facing. And we want to make sure that they feel supported and that their own mental health and wellness needs are met.
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, obviously, while respecting confidentiality, would you be able to share some of the top mental health challenges that you have seen and heard among farmers? Because I think part of my desire is to help normalize this conversation, and I think, for a lot of farmers who haven't quite embraced the whole I'm going to support my mental health thing, they might feel like, well, I'm not really, maybe what I'm experiencing isn't actually mental health. Maybe, people don't really know what I'm going through, and this is just a me thing. Like nobody else has ever had this. So I'm wondering if you can talk about some of the stories or topics that people come to this peer support network for.
Sure. So I would say one of the areas that we've heard from the network is financial challenges and recognizing that farming is a business. It can be very difficult financially. And so we've heard several stories about farms that are either on the edge of bankruptcy or trying to figure out if farming is viable for them going forward and wanting to talk to another farmer about what their options are. They don't necessarily want to go to the bank, but they want to talk to another farmer to try to see if there is a path forward.
Yeah,
And so that has been one of the common areas we've heard. Succession planning or transfer of farms and the
that's
family
interesting.
dynamics that are involved in that. That's another area. And honestly, because of that and that feedback that we got through the Mass Grown Wellness program, we started a succession planning separate program at the department because we realized it's really hard sometimes to just do this internally within your own family. But if we can
It's
help you
nearly
find
impossible. I
access,
I
yeah,
will argue that as as you multi-generation farm kid, and seeing and talking to an awful lot of people involved in either supporting succession planning or going through succession planning, it is nearly impossible for a family to do it well on their own. You would have to have a very simple family structure and a very simple farm structure, like one
Mhm.
kid. I think if you were a farm family with one child who wanted to continue doing the business just the way it is, you might be able to do farm succession on your own. But as soon as you start adding in multiple children or non-farming relatives, or maybe you don't have any children who want to take over the farm and but you want it to stay in farming, how do you find that new farm successor? It's so challenging, and it is emotional, and it is relationally
Mhm.
stressful. Like there's just so much that goes into it. So I think it's really important to have those experts in succession planning who also have some experience with mental health and communication strategies and farming, because a lawyer doesn't do it. Like my parents once said, well, we went to the lawyer, and the lawyer was like, "Well, what do you want to do?" And they were like, "Well, I thought I was coming to you." And I was like, "Nah, that's not what they do. Like lawyers can help you put the structure in place. Like, but as far as figuring out what you want, who's going to get what piece of land, or who gets how much money, or who gets tenancy, or I'm like, you've got to figure all that stuff out first and then go to the lawyer
Mhm.
and say, this is what we want to do. How do we codify this? And then they can do it for you.
Mhm.
And it's not a short process. I mean, years. Some people take
No.
20 years to get their succession plan, which I don't recommend, boys and girls out there. Like, please work on your succession planning.
I 100% agree with that. And I will say it is a daunting process, and we hear that over and over again. I consider that all the time as an only child, and thinking about succession planning and wanting to keep the farm actively going. What does that process look like? And not waiting to have the conversations and making that just part of everyday conversations.
And are you
And
actually involved in the farm at this time? I mean, you're pretty busy. So what is,
so I typically
because
get out
this
to
is a
the
great
farm once
question
a
about the
week.
succession, because you could arguably be one of those non-farming children, but you're an only child. So talk to us about where you are right now with that.
Yes. So I live in the central part of the state currently, but typically get back to the farm once a week. So I'm still involved on the farm, the decision making. My parents and I are talking on a daily basis.
Okay.
So pretty much always know what's happening on the farm. If a cow is given birth, anything that's happened, pretty much I'm aware of it.
Yeah.
And so, in talking with my parents, my hope would be to carry on the farming tradition and maintain the farm in the future. It may mean less animals at the farm, but still being able to have a herd of dairy cattle and maintain the function of the farm as a dairy farm.
Yeah.
So we talk about that quite a bit, and recognizing that whether you have 50 head of cattle or five, you're still farming, still the same tasks to do every day,
Yeah.
but just trying to figure out what that process will look like in the future.
Yeah, and what that looks like for you, because, getting back there once a week is a whole lot different than actually managing the farm day to day. So, that would require, I would imagine, either hiring help or,
Mhm.
changing your living arrangements. So again, like all of these moving pieces. So even when I said it was simple with one child, not necessarily.
No, not at all. Sometimes more challenging, I think.
Well, and then you have that whole added pressure of feeling like the farm's legacy is resting on your shoulders. Like
Mhm.
nobody that I've ever met wants to be the last farmer in the line. Like they just don't. They don't want to be the one who sells off the land. They don't want to be the one to sell off the herd. Like they just don't want to be last. And sometimes I will encourage you out there, sometimes you have to be last. And that's okay. Like if that's where your life is, and you have to say this farm's time in our family has seen the end, and now we're going to hand it over to somebody else to do something with, that is okay. And I know that I can feel the resistance from all the farmers hearing that, and they're all like, no, it's not okay. It's not okay. It is not easy, and it is not emotionally without, struggle, but it can be a really good thing and it can be okay.
Mhm.
So just to free people up a little bit, that yeah, the land is important and it's beautiful, and we don't want it to be something that anchors us so tightly that we end up losing ourself for that piece of ground. Like the farmer themselves, I love that, farms first is what they call it in Vermont. I have a column in Country Folks Grower, and I call it Farmers First. So it's, we want the farmers' well-being always at the front of our minds, I think,
Mhm.
because they're the ones who are really the most important in the whole picture. Farms are important, but they'd be nothing without a farmer. So we want to take care of
Exactly.
them. Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, so that's really powerful. So we talked about a couple of the mental health issues. We talked about the finances, and we talked about succession planning. What are a couple of the other ones that you think are really common for farmers?
I think something that maybe we don't talk about as much or see in the news, but it's certainly around us is climate change.
Hmm.
And with the impacts that farms in Massachusetts have faced the last few years, that has created additional stressors and pressure that many farmers hadn't experienced in their lifetime. If they had been farming for 20, 30 years, the last few years were some of the most challenging because of a frost, freeze, and flood event in 2023, a drought in 2024. You look at the blizzard that we just had last week and
And it's
infrastructure
snowing. It's
damage.
snowing outside my window right now.
We can't seem to get away from the snow this year. But those climate change impacts are really taking a toll on farms as well, because as much as you try to prepare from season to season, Nature may have other plans and completely out of your control, and you could lose your crop in the matter of a couple hours or days when these type of weather events hit. And so that's also reminded us at the department and made us really look more intentionally at the programs and services we have in terms of our grants to
Mm.
be able to support farms with their resiliency and trying to be more climate smart about their adaptations that they're making on their farms so that they can weather these challenges.
So, whether those challenges. So let's talk about that a little bit because depending on the type of farmer, there are lots of different types of farmers. We have our, regenerative, we have our conventional, I mean, the huge scope of different mindsets and approaches in agriculture. And I know that some farmers really are resistant to the idea of climate change and conversations around that, because I think for at least some of the farmers I know who have a little bit of resistance to that, it comes from a political perspective and sometimes a philosophical perspective. Um, so I have a couple of questions for you about this. And the first is, how can we talk to farmers about the effects of climate change in a way that isn't uh, doesn't ostracize them automatically by the fact that we're talking about climate change? Does that make sense?
So when I talk to farmers, and typically the weather is something that whether you're a farmer or not, we're always talking about the weather. Been talking about the blizzard since last Monday, and it comes up in daily conversation. Same with farmers. When you visit their farm or when you see them, you're talking now about the upcoming spring planting season. It's probably going to be a muddy season because of all the snow we've had.
Yep.
And so when I talk to farmers about it, we're typically talking about the weather impacts. How has it impacted your farm? What are you seeing? How is this different from 10 years ago when you first started farming or when you were in the middle of your farming career? What did that look like on your farm and how has that now changed?
Oh, I
And
love that.
so
So you're starting with the present and more like observing what the present is and then asking that comparison question. So it's actually giving the farmers the power to identify those changes themselves
Mhm.
and to kind of talk themselves into realizing that there is a climate, that the climate is changing for whatever reason. Like, I don't think sometimes reasons are not as important as the fact that it's happening. But to recognize that they do have a different situation now than they had 20 years ago, and then to start asking, how do you plan on addressing those differences? Oh,
Yeah.
that sounds super effective. And do you find that that is more effective than saying, "Hey, how does climate change, what does climate change look on your farm?"
I would say so. I mean, we see it just in the number of applications to our Climate Smart Agriculture Program grant. It does
Oh,
have that climate smart language, but we see so many dairy farms now that have no-till equipment, and they've seen the benefits because they heard from another farmer who had applied for the grant
okay.
and 5 years ago got no-till equipment, and now they're seeing the soil health aspects and regenerative agriculture, as you mentioned. So I think word of mouth again, it always comes back to that, but really just trying to allow the farmers to frame it for themselves.
Yeah.
And that storytelling piece and the historical look back, I think
Mhm.
has been really effective.
And what do you think are what are some of the changes that you think are coming down the pike for farmers? Like, what are some of the steps that farmers can and should be taking to deal with the new climate realities?
So when I think about, well, our livestock sector, there's a lot of aging infrastructure
Mhm.
and one bad snowstorm, and we've unfortunately seen this in recent years, could cause a barn to collapse. And when you have livestock in there, you're typically going to lose some of that livestock if the barn collapses. And it's a horrific situation, but it's really caused many of our farms to think about their infrastructure and apply for grants or work with farm credit to be able to apply for funding to shore up that infrastructure.
Mm.
For our vegetable producers, we see a lot more doing season extension through greenhouses and indoor growing. A lot are shifting to that model because they know they can control it, and to be able to have that controlled agricultural environment
Yeah.
is almost an insurance policy for them when bad weather hits. So those are some of the things we're seeing, as well as a focus on soil health. Because of floods a few years ago, many farmers recognized that that soil wasn't going to be the same after the floods. So they've thought about either rotating fields that they're growing in or no-till equipment if they're producing corn. And we're seeing more and more of that.
Yeah, and it's interesting that it's taking these kinds of situations to push agriculture into a lot of these practices because these are not new practices anymore. Like even I can never say the word. I have to say it twice because I have to slow down and I have to like sound it out in my mouth. Regenerative agriculture, like these practices are not new. Um, no-till's been around, oh my gosh, for generations now. It
Mhm.
really has been. This is not brand new. And yet its implementation in a lot of places is still new. And so I think it's really encouraging that we have actually a lot of the practices and the historical knowledge to be able to address some of these issues if we're willing to, get the help that we need to be able to identify what works and doesn't work on a particular farm. And
Mhm.
and I wonder also like the infrastructure things. So we were talking about finances being one of the key stressors. So, if I'm a dairy farmer and I have chronically low income because I dairy farmed as well, and I know that milk prices aren't a whole heck of a lot higher now than they were when I was a teenager in the 90s. So, that right there is a whole nother policy. How our
Mhm.
ag policy from the top down has not helped farmers. Um, we won't even go there. But when you look at that, so you don't have a lot of money, you have aging infrastructure, your livestock spend a very large percentage of the time, especially in the winter, in that infrastructure, either being milked or, feeding and all that kind of stuff. So, what kind of supports are there for farmers to say, I got to upgrade this infrastructure, but I really can't take out a loan. I really don't have the cash up front. Like, what am I going to do? What are some recommendations that you could offer to them?
So through some of our grant programs, there's opportunities for infrastructure investments. And we have a large program at the state called the Food Security Infrastructure Grant. It came about during COVID and launched in June 2020. It was a $25 million program and was really meant to think more short term about ways that we could respond to make the local food system more resilient during the pandemic. It's now shifted to long term thinking. So we see dairy farms and livestock producers applying through that program, looking at siting potentially a new barn or making gradual improvements to their infrastructure, whether it's new roofing on a barn or looking to adapt the inside of the barn for cow comfort purposes, which will lead to potentially greater milk production. So tying in that food security angle. But also, we are fortunate for farms that are able to work with Farm Credit East or Farm Service Agency to be able to take out loans. That is another option for some farms, which are often complementary to our grant programs. So we see farms making those changes through those programs, but know that the need is greater than the resources that we can provide because so many of our farms are multi-generational and oftentimes the infrastructure piece isn't always top of mind.
No, no, and I think that's, what I'm also hearing in that is that, I know some farmers who just refuse to take grant money. They don't want to take, government subsidies, and I totally respect that. Like 100% respect that. And so for those people who are in that situation, and even those who are more comfortable accepting grant funding and that kind of thing, I think it's really important that we start doing more planning for our farms, that we really
Mhm.
do sit down with some experts who are involved in whole farm planning. And I would say whole farm planning because as great as it is to sit down with a financial planner, our farms are so much more than just the finances. And oftentimes what I'm starting to realize is that the financial component can often be a reflection of whether or not the farm is reflecting the farmer himself, him or herself, like their needs and desires. And if you inherit a farm and you're trying to function in a way that ancestors before you did, but you're not really incorporating your own expertise, your own personal desires and needs and all of that, you could be creating a farm life that is inherently unsustainable for many reasons other than just finances. And I'm thinking about you saying, I want to keep the farm, I want to keep our family farm in dairy, but that might mean a smaller herd. It might
Mhm.
mean hiring a herd manager. Like who knows? It could look very, very different from the way it looks right now. And to say that that could actually be the best thing you can do for your farm is to restructure your farm while also thinking, how does this restructuring provide the finances that we need to be able to maintain our buildings on a more regular basis or do that kind of thing. So just lots of really juicy food for thought there on all the different
Mhm.
options that farmers have. And to just remind farmers that just because you have a functioning farm doesn't mean that investing in a farm planner as a consultant for a time is a waste of your money. Like, and sometimes it's still the best use of your money because they can help you think through issues that you might not think through on your own. So, oh my gosh. So I'm looking at the clock because this always happens, and I come down to the end of my time and I say, huh, we could talk forever. Um,
Mhm.
but I am going to kind of pull this to some closure with the question that I ask everybody who's on my show. And that is, if you had one piece of advice that you think every farmer should know, what would that be?
That's a tough one. I think it's that there is a community out there for whatever you may be facing, and whether it's looking to the state government, whether it's looking to a fellow farmer. I truly believe that we are a community. And so when times can feel very heavy or difficult, look to that community. That includes family and friends, but sometimes it's looking outside of your immediate network and looking farther into the community and being willing to ask for help, whether it's just trying to understand a new farming practice or the future of your farm. Look to that community because we are very fortunate in the Northeast to have a very supportive farming community. And whether it's within Massachusetts or looking outside to other states, you will certainly find another farmer within the community that is always willing to talk and share stories. So look to that community and lean into it.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yes, I have nothing to add to that, Ashley. It's beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank all of you for joining us. And we will see you next time on Food, Flowers, and Fun. Bye.
Thanks so much for having me.
How do you multiply by fractions, Mom?
Farmworks calling, our show is all done. Goodbye, farewell, so long, adieu. See you next week, same time, same place for Food, Flowers, and Fun. Go in peace. Visit us at www.penlightfarmers.com.